Thanks. Nicole Wallace, the news media love to find associations and play them up. I am convinced that we overdid it on the extent of the mentor-mentee friendship between Mueller and Comey. It is also clear we overdid it on the extent of the friendship for 3 decades between Mueller and Barr, they having been guests at each other's children's weddings. You'd think they'd talk.
Yeah, and listen, friends can disagree, but this disagreement, I think what Frank Figliuzzi is getting out is key. The what is now abundantly clear. The what is that Attorney General William Barr, and a source close to the Attorney General told me, I said, why is he doing all this? And this was around the policy announcement around asylum, where he basically backed a policy of indefinite jail time for asylum seekers. I said, what's the why? What's he getting out of it? He said he's deeply invested in Donald Trump's success. And I thought, well, you know, a normal president, we would all be deeply invested in his success. This was an investigation at its core about Donald Trump's daily, sometimes hourly, assault on the rule of law in this country. As the country's chief executive, he sat in his pajamas watching Fox and Friends, maligning the FBI, maligning Robert Mueller, maligning Rod Rosenstein. So, Bill Barr didn't walk into that room with the scale at 0. Rule of law had a deficit because Donald Trump had been kicking it in the teeth for 22 months. And what the country's attorney general did was walk in there and back up the guy doing the kicking. So the question for me now turns to why? Why? And why did they, I mean, it also goes back
you have an answer for that?
I know, but it goes back to the obstruction memo. I mean, did they just happen to pick a guy who just happened to have so much free time that he just happened to write a 19-page memo saying that a president couldn't obstruct justice and that Robert Mueller, who you described, I'm sure accurately, as his friend, should never, ever be able to query the president on the topic of obstruction? I mean, it just puts in place, and there will be a strong wave of trying to bully the press, saying it's over, no collusion, no obstruction. Really? Then why did all that happen today? Why have we heard from Barr 5 times? If the Mueller report is so awesome for Donald Trump, we have now heard from someone who is a human shield of Mueller's findings 5 times. If Mueller exonerated Trump on collusion, if there's nothing ugly in there, why have we heard from Barr 5 times?
Of course, that's all about to fall away in a little more than 20 minutes. And Neil Katyal, as Nicole's speaking, I'm thinking there was an attorney general named Robert Kennedy who was greatly invested in the success of the president. How and why is this different?
Well, I do think that, you know, even when we wrote the special counsel regulations, we thought a lot about Bobby Kennedy because he was obviously, you know, the brother of the president.
Hadn't tried a case in court.
No, but goes down as a legendary attorney general in part because he generally did his job and, responsible for all sorts of good things, civil rights and the like. But one of the points for having the special counsel is because we knew sometimes you can have an attorney general who's just compromised for one reason or another. Now here, I think Nicole's absolutely right to say this attorney general, the way he's been acting, it's not like he showed up on day one and was surprised, oh, Donald Trump is a train wreck when it comes to the presidency. He ran to that nuisance. He knew it from the start. He wrote the 19-page memo. Trump had been burning the rule of law in all sorts of ways. But there's one question we haven't talked about yet, which is our dear friend Rod Rosenstein. I mean, this is a guy who was, I think, he appointed Mueller, had tried to, looks like from all outward accounts, steered the ship in a good way. Then he sat today right behind Barr at the press conference, and a press conference which fundamentally violated his own key tenet. What he said in his memo to the President Trump about the firing of Comey was this, quote, "The goal of a federal criminal investigation is not to announce our thoughts at a press conference." I'm sorry, that's just what happened.
That's just what happened.
Rod Rosenstein also, we all know from reporting in multiple news organizations, was angry that his memo about Comey's conduct was used as the justification for firing Comey. That was the act. That was the presidential act that put in motion 9 days of mayhem that led Rod Rosenstein to appoint Robert Mueller in the first place. So for Rod Rosenstein to stand behind William Barr, who just uttered an hour ago, the president was frustrated because there was never any collusion. Well, Rod didn't think so, or why would he have appointed Special Counsel Mueller in the first place? There's so many whys becoming clear as sort of the smoke from that production starts to fade.
Jeremy Bash, who, like Rod Rosenstein, also happens to be a Harvard-educated lawyer, has a contribution to this conversation. Jeremy?
I thought where the Attorney General was the weakest, Brian, was when he defended the president's conduct of obstructive action by saying, well, the president sincerely believed that his political agenda coming into office would be compromised. I mean, the same could be said about an Erdogan, a Putin, a Kim Jong-un, and the other authoritarian. I mean, that's what authoritarians do. They sincerely believe that their political standing, their position atop the government is threatened, and so they lash out, sometimes in unlawful and illegal, unethical, and shameful ways. So the fact that the president sincerely believed that he was under fire doesn't mean that his obstructive actions were legal. I think the Attorney General's spin on that, was extraordinarily weakly argued. I also think, Brian, it's important to note that essentially the Attorney General conceded that the Trump campaign did conspire with WikiLeaks to disseminate the hacked information. He simply said that because they didn't participate in the underlying hacking, therefore it's not an underlying crime. But I think the fundamental question is, did the Trump campaign know about and welcome Russia's interference? We now know the answer is, of course, they did.
Nicole, from a senior Democratic aide on the Hill, I'm getting the word contemptible performance.
Yeah, it was remarkable. And Jeremy's right. I mean, the country's top law enforcement official should have underscored the headline that Jeremy just did. The reason we're getting to it an hour in is because he didn't make it. The Trump campaign did collude with WikiLeaks on the dissemination. No crime was committed, and we should all celebrate that our president and his campaign didn't commit a crime. But the reason it's, an hour afterward that we're getting to these really revelatory things in the Mueller investigation is because the Attorney General went out and said 6 times, Trump didn't collude, Trump didn't collude, Trump didn't collude. And Jeremy, I want to know your thoughts on why not, because your analysis about the coordination with WikiLeaks in terms of dissemination is spot on. And what is the protection for our country to make sure that not just the Trump campaign, but some other campaign or primary effort doesn't do the same thing?
It's a critically important point, Nicole, because, of course, the Department of Justice is part of the apparatus of our government, along with the intelligence community, the Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies that's supposed to defend the country, not just defend the political standing of the president. And we need a Department of Justice. We need an Attorney General who is going to be resolute in that defense, one who understands that this was a threat to our country, that the presidential campaign, the candidate himself, and the incoming president did enable that threat, did welcome it, did benefit from it, did reward it. And if the Attorney General can't say that, can't defend us, then he's not the Attorney General. He's just the attorney for Donald Trump.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.